then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa. It's time for another Amish Inquisition on Sunday, the 20th of October, 2024, episode 350. I'm Phil.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight we're very happy to be joined by author and researcher of all things weird and paranormal, Mark Anthony Wyatt. How are you doing, Mark? Are you reading us?
Very well. Yeah, very well, thank you. Nice to be on again.
Yeah, how many is this we've done together
Hi,
now?
Matt. Hi, Phil.
Hello.
How many is it?
This will be, I think, sort of like 3.5. I think because we did,
I did do half a podcast.
yeah. I say 3.5 because we did one that was sort of mirrored. You did a bonus episode, I think, on Guy Fawkes, which we did together. So I'm sort of counting that. If I count that, I think it's 4.
That was the last one, I think, was it?
Yeah.
Which is getting on for 2 years ago, I think.
Years. Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
It was,
No.
Yeah, that was a good... I really enjoyed that one.
And I owe you my thanks for introducing us to Bob Osborne.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, he's cool, isn't he? Yeah. He's a character. I like him.
Yeah, I think we've had him on twice, haven't we, now?
Yes.
Not for a while.
No.
Yeah. He's probably your most popular guest, I would imagine.
He's probably up there, yeah. I mean, I think Stig takes some beating.
Yes.
Yeah, I would think so.
Stig Hansen,
Yes.
Everyone seems to love Stig
Stig.
Hansen.
Yeah,
Stig
We
Hansen.
have the Stig on, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I should
Right.
have mentioned.
That's not the Stig from Top Gear, then.
No, he's anonymous.
Yes.
He's not much of a talker either.
No. Yeah.
I should mention, Mark, before we
That's
get
right, yeah. With a helmet on, yeah.
before we get carried away and chatting, Mark's an author and he's written these a couple. Well, he's
Yeah.
written a few books, but there's 2 I have here. Look, The Spirit of Cornwall, Volume 1 and Volume 2. There we are. So there'll be a link in the show notes for them if you want to pick them up. If you're into sort of 14, I would say, because paranormal. There's more than just paranormal stuff you're interested in. It's more. I would call it sort of 14 is a bit of more of a broader term. Would you concur?
Yeah, 40, yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in the legends and the mysteries and so on. But I sort of got more interested in the sort of crossover between the sort of the culture and the weird stuff. Like art and culture. Just generally the way it blends. And in the last few years, I've been sort of getting more into that side of things and reading a lot more. A hell of a lot more because I sort of got out of a habit really, unless I had to, like a lot of us. I was scrolling too much and watching YouTube, but I've got myself back into how I was when I was younger, which was like constantly walking around with a book in my pocket, every few minutes, like every chance I got, I was reading something. I was known for it at work in the old days, and I'm sort of heading back in that direction now.
What
not before time. So,
what you're reading at the moment?
At the moment, I'm reading. Well, I've got into a bit of a bad habit. I think it's a bad habit of reading too many books at the same time, which is something I never used to do. I used to just do one, finish it, do the next one, and I've got into this habit of just having like half a dozen books on the go. So at the moment, I'm reading Mike Ashley's Algernon Blackwood biography, which is really good. I'm reading again, actually, John Keel. Oh dear, I never remember the names of them. One of it'll come back to me later. I'm reading one of the Keel ones, and I can see the cover, but I can't see the title in my head. And various other things. I mean, I'm fascinated by people like Blackwood and Arthur Machen because they were writing. I'm talking about like the 1890s, early 1900s, and so on. Or they were around at that time, shall we say, and some of them were right, But they were talking about all this weird stuff back in those days. They sometimes described it differently, like fairy folklore and all this sort of stuff. And we often think that, we're sort of breaking new ground. We're sort of quite arrogant, I suppose, in our time, where we think that we know everything and we're discovering everything. But these guys were already onto all that stuff in their fiction. And a lot of the fiction that Blackwood wrote, it was based on real stories, things that people had told him had happened to them. So that's just something that sort of comes through. And he was very into Blackwood was really all about nature. He loved nature, and I look upon all things sort of. I don't really like the term paranormal, but all things paranormal, I look upon that almost through the lens of nature. I think it's something. It's very closely connected. And if you think about it, a lot of experiences people have are connected to nature. You know, being out and about, like Bigfoot and so on. You know. Anyway, I'm rabbiting. Ask me a question.
I've never heard of these guys. Blackwood and
Have
who?
you lost me?
No, I've got you. Yeah.
Really? Algon? All right, Algon and Blackwood. If I could reach, I could show you the book I'm reading at the moment. Just bear with me.
Okay.
You hear a crash, it's because I've dropped all my books. Hang on. Here we go. Oh, very professional, isn't it? I don't think you can see
fine.
that. That's
Algernon. Wow.
that's Algon and Blackwood, and I'm only Algernon. Yeah, I'm saying Algernon because that's just the way I've always said it.
Right.
I think it depends who's saying it, but
Yes.
Algernon. Algernon. I prefer Algernon.
So he must be similar sort of time frame to Charles Ford.
Yeah,
then.
so I
maybe
mean,
maybe a bit earlier, if anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Fort's dates, but probably, yeah. I mean, was he early 1900s, something like
I
that?
seem to think so. Yeah, when he was active.
I mean,
might be
obviously they've
wrong.
got a lifespan. So I mean, Blackwood was popular in he was on the BBC in the really early days. Well, actually, a bit later. The early days were like the late 30s, weren't they? So I'm thinking he was. I don't know for sure, but I think definitely the 1950s. And I'm not quite sure when he died, but he he was known. He was more famous in his old age,
Right.
but during his younger years, he was a traveller. He just went all over the world, and yeah, he sort of worked towards what he was doing. He was a great storyteller. Like used to tell his nieces and so on ghost stories, and people used to say to him because he did it so well, you know, you should sort of pursue this and do this somehow.
Right.
And he didn't really want to do it at first, but eventually he sort of went down that road, and that's really how we know him now. He wrote so many books. I mean, some of these stories. I mean, there's one I love called. They're quite. He wrote a lot of short form stories, which I particularly love. Entrance and Exit is one of my favorites. Ancient Lights is another one. If you get a chance to just listen to those two, you can find them on YouTube, people reading them.
Right.
And they're sort of like 20-minute stories, you know.
Mm.
But they tap into all these things that, you know, if you go listen to any of the sort of prime movers in the paranormal, you know, they discuss this sort of thing. And as I said earlier, they sort of, how can I put this? They give a lot of credit to people like John Keel, which is fair enough. But there were people long before John Keel who were talking about this stuff. As I say, Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, people like that, and E.F. Benson. There's loads of them. There's loads of them. Once you start digging into them, they're fascinating.
What are some of the differences in the way he describes, you know, sort of take something? Does he talk about sort of flying saucers or anything like that?
Not in any of the books I've read. They're mostly sort of based on sort of, well, there's a lot of ghost stories, obviously,
Right.
but there's a lot of, how can I put this? Where Machen did the same thing. They will tell a story, and there's like a story within the story. Sort of, it's there planted. It's not in your face. They don't mention it, but by, you know, like if you were trying to find, I heard a great example of this the other day, but say like a detective. Say like the Code Breakers. If you go back to World War II, right? the Americans, I mean, you'll know this, like the Battle of Midway. This is an example of what I'm trying to say. In the Battle of Midway, the code breakers, who were mostly musicians because they could sort of find patterns. They were able to find patterns. They used all these musicians, the American Navy, or government, I'm not sure what, but it was the Navy who were doing it. And they got these, they were all listening in on these messages coming from the Japanese high command, because they were trying to figure out what the Japs' next move was after Pearl Harbor. And it was crucial, it could have gone either way. So they used these code breakers, just like we did in London with Bletchley Park and all that, similar thing. And each one of these people listening into these different broadcasts were able, obviously they could speak Japanese and convert it, or had people who could do it for them. And one of them would find one thing, another would find something else, and there'd be like maybe 50 of these people finding different pieces of a puzzle, but they were looking for the piece that wasn't there. But these other 50 pieces enabled them to figure out what they might be looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a jigsaw puzzle, essentially.
So it's like they
But
yeah. So they
looking
would sort of know the shape of that information, if you like. Yeah, but you have to look at all the other stuff. The other stuff is the clues. So they're not telling you the central piece you want. And you eventually, if it all points towards something, which is their best guess. Well, that's what they did. So like people like Arthur Machen particularly did that with their writing. So you would be reading a story, and there'd be sort of like a subtext to it, sort of deeper within it, which it was not overt. I think that's the best way I can describe it. But when you read it, you sort of know. And a lot of that comes down to like the actual figure of the fear, for example. It's more what you can't see. So there's always this sort of lingering presence that's sort of just hanging there. But they never, blatantly sort of name it, perhaps, Like in The Willows. The Willows would be a good example if you read The Willows. So that was probably his most famous story, Blackwoods. So it's all based in nature. And he uses the landscape, basically the nature, he uses that as the mystery. I can't explain it any other way, really.
Yeah, no spoilers. I might read them.
So yeah, you need no. Yeah, try them. Seriously, try them. Yeah, I do definitely recommend Machen and Blackwood. They're my favourites, but there's a lot of other good guys as well, and ladies. I'm currently reading a lady, a very unknown lady, really. She wasn't Cornish, but she lived in Cornwall, and her name was Mary Williams. And no relation to Michael, if you heard of him, no relation. But she wrote short stories, sort of horror stories, ghost stories, this sort of thing. And she incorporated a lot of the people. She was a journalist, and she incorporated a lot of people that she knew, just obviously used different names. And so there are sort of vague references to people like Crowley, Dennis Vale Baker, people like that. And there's a lot of talk of like rituals on hilltops and black magic and all this sort of stuff. But it's all coming from a place that she was on the fringes of all that stuff. She knew more than she was letting on, like a lot of them did. So, yeah, she's a good one to check out, Mary Williams. So, yeah, that's what, back to your original question, that's what I've sort of, I'm sort of more into the, I've sort of got more into the sort of literature side of it and getting into the fiction a bit more, which probably brings us around to what I sent you the other day. I mean, I'm sort of doing something that's not very easy to classify, I suppose, the bits I sent you, the chapters.
Right, yeah, you sent me two chapters from the book you're working on now, and I would say it's my my sort of impression was it's part autobiographical, but it's about weird things happening as well. It's like you're instead of, because like the two books that showed up on the screen are majority
Right.
is stories that you've collected from other people, isn't it? I think it's fair to say. Whereas this is more, it's your own
Yes,
sort of
yeah.
stories and weird happenings.
Yeah, but the actual idea behind this one is not really paranormal, although it touches on it occasionally, because that's just the way I am. I'm interested in that stuff. So these sort of things either happen to me or happen to people I know, and it was a period of my life where I basically gave up I won't go into boring detail, but I gave up a reasonable career at the turn of the millennium. And I was just sick of it. I was repping for builders merchants, which in England, we all know what that is. So you're sort of out on the road, going to builders' sites, going to builders' offices, and you're basically the go-between between a company and them. So you're sort of, it's like a building relationship with them. So you're not just going in there selling them stuff. You're talking about the football. You're talking about music. And then at the end of the meeting, you'll sort of get a lorry load of bricks delivered to them or something. So it's a sociable job. And I did it for a long time. And I did it in wonderful parts of the country. I did it in the Northern Dales around Northumberland.
Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely beautiful. Did it around there. And I also did it in Cornwall. And I did it in Surrey. So like all over England, really. And just moved around doing it a lot because I sort of trained to do all that originally. And then I had enough of it. And I thought, I want to do something different. I want to be out in nature. And I'd always had this hankering to try my hand at gardening because I did it when I was younger. And I was quite interested in the idea of designing gardens as well. And I sort of got into that a bit later. So cutting a long story short, I chucked it all in and went to work to sort of learn the game because I didn't know enough. I went to like a landscaping company near Bude, and I was there for about 6 weeks. Met a lot of really cool people, worked with a few, and then I sort of picked up enough to sort of get out and do it on my own because I wanted to just go self-employed. Yep. And that's where these stories come from because in a period of about 15 years, I worked for a lot of different people, like different job every day or 2 or 3 jobs a day sometimes 1 job a day, whatever it was. They were all different. And I got to meet all these really diverse people literally from all walks of life. And there seemed to be quite a high percentage of crazy people amongst them in various ways. And I used to sort of make notes. I used to make notes of these people thinking, oh, it'd make a great... And then one day I was at a... yeah, just a minute. So I'll just make a few notes about you. Yeah, crazy, mad as a hatter. Yeah. So anyway, I was visiting this farm where I did a job, and there's this lovely lady, an older lady, who I was looking after. She lived at the side of an orchard, an old apple orchard, and on this fantastic farm just outside Bude. And I used to tell her about this particular guy. You've read this, Would That Suit You? The story, Would That Suit You? I used to tell her about him, used to break confidentiality and talk about him. But I would talk to her, and she would just be on the floor laughing because she could not believe that this guy was that crazy. And so next time I went up there, she would always say, oh, tell me about Mad Mike. What's he been up to? And she wanted to know. And she said to me, you've got to write these things down, Mark, because one day your memory will go and you won't remember it all. You just remember bits. You need to write this down. So going back about 20 years, I started jotting it all down. And just ideas. It wasn't like it was just notes really, but it's just scribbled out chapters. And then over the last few years, I've been looking at it again and reminding myself of all this stuff. And each one was different. So there's going to be probably about 10 of them in the end when I narrow it down. Right. And they all had a past. And this is like coming back to this weird fictions again. They had mysterious pasts, some of these people. particularly the guy I called Mad Mike. So yeah, I don't know if there's how you can't really pigeonhole it because it's not really paranormal, and it's not your mainstream literature either.
I think
It's sort of somewhere between. It's sort of
Mad
somewhere
Mike,
out there on its own.
Your Mad Mike story is closer to true crime, I think.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about him and his weird behaviours and his bungalows by the sea.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's crazy. I mean, even talking about it now, it's like, how do I even begin to explain that and make it make sense? So I try and keep this brief, but the first time he contacted me by phone and he said, "I'll come up and see me, and I need a gardener." So I got the address, went up there. I'm cutting this really short. Went up there, and it was a beautiful day. All the curtains were pulled shut. It's a small bungalow. All the curtains were shut, which wasn't a big deal because if you're watching TV in the front room and you get that sun on the screen, so you pull the curtains, don't you? So that's what I put it down to. And then I realized that every time I worked there, the curtains were always closed, right? And he had this, like, in the morning, he would come out and he'd make me a breakfast. I didn't ask for it. It was very kind of him to do it.
What was in the
and
breakfast?
He was a nice guy. I mean, he generally was a nice guy. Oh, this is the thing. Have you read it, Matt?
No, I haven't read it. No, but I'm wondering.
No, you haven't read it. Okay, well, I won't spoil it. But basically, I would be outside working, and then I would hear the rear door of his property. I mean, it's crazy. You'd hear all these chains being released and all these bolts being slid open. This would take about 5 minutes, right? The whole thing take about 5 minutes, and eventually the door would open. He would appear in the doorway, and he would say, "I'll do the voices." This is what he said: "Have you had any breakfast, Mark?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I did." And he'd go, "Well, what did you have?" And I'd say, "Oh, I had some cornflakes." Back in the day, I did. I wouldn't need them now, but I said, "Yeah, I've had some cornflakes, Mike." And he goes, "Oh, well, I bet you could sink a." And he would give me this like a menu of what he was offering me. So he would say, "I bet you could eat 2 eggs, some beans, some toast, some mushrooms," and he'd go through this long list of his sort of, strange voice as well. And I would say, I knew that he wanted to make it for me, and I didn't want to offend him, obviously. I didn't really need it. So I'd say, "Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Mike." And this is just one example, but he would offer me something different every time. Sometimes he would offer me all this stuff, and then he would change his mind about what he wanted to make me, right? So he would then offer me something else. And I would realize that, oh, he wants me to accept this one, not that one. And I would just go along with it just to be, polite and so on. So then he would go back in and you'd hear the chains going back on. All these bolts sliding back and forth, right? That would take about 5 minutes again. Sometimes he'd come straight back out again. You'd hear them all opening again. The door would open and he'd go, "Oh, I forgot to ask you, do you want sauce on that?" or something. Whatever it was different every time. And then he'd go through what I called the door locking ceremony or whatever ritual. He would do all that again. He'd go back in. Then sometimes you'd never receive it. He would never come out with it. Other times you'd come out and he'd say, "Your breakfast is ready." He'd go, "Pull up a table." And whatever the weather was, he would never invite me in. It was just like, "Pull up a table. There's a chair over there."
A white
and I had to
plastic
sit at
garden
this
furniture.
table. Sometimes it was, yeah, that's right, yeah. And it was pissing down with rain sometimes, And he would say, "Oh, pull up a seat." So anyway, I'd sit down and he'd bring it out to me, or I'd go and grab it. Sometimes he'd stand there and just watch me eating it. And usually he'd just go back inside. But on one occasion, he actually forgot to bring it out. And I didn't care because I didn't really want it anyway. I mean, it was just being kind, I wanted to be polite. I didn't want to offend him. And I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything because I didn't really need it anyway. And then when I was leaving, just before I left, he came out and he said, "Did you enjoy your breakfast, Mark?" So I thought, instead of being rude and sort of saying, "Well, you didn't bring it out," I just thought, no, don't do that. So I said, yeah, it was really nice. And he said, was it? What did you have?
No.
I've then got to lie about what I didn't have.
Yeah.
Right. So this is what the guy was like. So I would tell him what I had, and I'd sort of play with that a bit, because just for fun, I'd sort of say, oh, I had 2 eggs and whatever. And then on one occasion when I said that, he said, you had eggs, did you? I said, yeah. And he went, that's why we're short. That's why we didn't have enough to go around, because he was living with his mother. He said, that's why you had all the eggs. And he went in and slammed the door because I'd eaten his eggs, but I hadn't eaten his eggs. It was like, this is how crazy this guy was. But he would forget about it very quickly afterwards. He didn't hold grudges or anything, grudges for things I hadn't done. So that was one guy.
And you mentioned his mother, the mysterious
son,
mother, Mark.
Sorry.
Yeah, was she a skeleton in the basement?
If you ever watched Cheers... Well, did you ever watch Cheers? Do you remember Nam? Do you remember Nami?
No.
He used to waddle into the pub, a big guy. Right. If you ever see it, he had a wife who you never saw. She never appeared. It's a well-known comedy device. They do it in a lot of sitcoms and films. So she was like, I don't think I ever saw her, although I did see her eyes or her head, because on one occasion when I was eating this breakfast, there were these 2 heads came through the middle of the curtain. So there was one, I think his head was higher. So you imagine a curtain sort of pulled like through the center of your head, so your head's poking through, because the curtains were always shut. And then a bit lower down, her head. And there's just these 2 heads, like it looked like suspended heads. I mean, obviously they were behind the curtains, and they were just watching me eat this breakfast, So I mean, I carried on working with them for a long time. I had a mate who used to cut hedges whenever I did large hedges, which is a big old job. I used to have this mate who had a longer reach for me. He was like 6'4" and had very long arms and very strong guy, and he could reach further than I could, and so on. So between the 2 of us, we'd cut all these big hedges. And he came round to work there. So I said to him, I said, look, this guy's a bit strange. And I told him a couple of the things that he did. And he just didn't believe a word of it. He thought, you're just bullshitting, Mark. So anyway, he came round. And as he was watching the door, I think it was the door opening ritual with the bolts and the chains. And it was going on for about 5 minutes. And he just turned to me and he said, no fucking way. And I just looked at him and said, yes, fucking way. Yes, I told you this happened. Anyway, there were other things. So anyway, let's not go on about him. But that was one of them. But they weren't all crazy. They were just interesting people, And I've waited a long time to write about this and put it out, because obviously a lot of these people have gone now. I've changed the names of just about everybody. But I think certain people would recognize themselves if they read it.
Right.
Yeah. So the other one I sent you was more probably in line with the sort of thing your audience might be more interested in, which was the Emma and Andrew. I haven't got a proper that's just a working title. Did you read that one?
Yeah.
That was about my brush with David Kelly, Dr. David Kelly, which I found just a strange thing to happen. Shall I tell that one?
Absolutely, yeah. This is Dr. David Kelly, who
there's really
committed suicide over the dodgy dossier that led to the Iraq invasion.
Yeah. So very briefly, I was working at a farm near Crackington Haven doing some gardening with this same guy that was helping me at this other job occasionally, and we were strimming. They call it weed eating over here in America. So we were strimming the side of this. So this farm, I should explain, this farm is on the coast, near the coast, near Crackington Haven in North Cornwall. Beautiful area, quite remote. So there's we haven't got many neighbours. So there's just these two farms that are sort of stuck sort of side by side. Each one of them's got, 10 acres or whatever it is. And the drives are sort of quite close to each other. So for some reason, I'd been asked to strim the edges of the neighbour's approach road. So he had some old farm buildings turned into holiday properties, holiday lets. So my friend Julian is doing one side, I'm doing the other. And we're just strimming around all these big granite sets, on the grass to make it look nice. And we both see this oldish, I was 40 something at the time. This guy, I thought he was in his sort of 60s, but it turns out when I've looked into it, he was only 59, but it was close. He was quite a, that'd be rude, but it's like an oldish looking 60 something really. And he was approaching us down this long lane from these holiday lets. We had no idea who he was. And as he approached us, we obviously stopped working because they're liable to pick up little stones and throw them off. I've done it many a time. So we both stopped working and just stood and waited for him. And as he walked past, we both noticed how depressed he looked. He looked we didn't know him, but he looked really like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. You could tell. And we said good afternoon to him, and he responded in kind, I think. He did respond. And he just walked off out of this field gate and off into the lane in the general direction of the sea. There's like fields. There's like half a dozen fields, and then you'd be on the cliff edge. So he sort of wandered off down this lane. And we just carried on working again. Then we saw two ladies coming out of the same area. And this is a very quiet place. You don't see anyone generally. And the people we worked for don't live there. So they weren't there, and there was nobody staying there. They've got a property in Oxfordshire, which is another part of this story. So these two ladies came out. The lady was roughly maybe a bit younger than the old guy was, or the older guy. And there was a younger lady. She was probably 30 something. So like mother and daughter, we guessed, and we were right. They come walking towards us, and we stop. And they looked really, really worried. And they said, "Have you seen a gentleman walking along here?" and described him. We said, "Yeah, he just came through," and he went off to the left. So they sort of told us, "Oh, he's been under a lot of pressure lately, and we're concerned about him." So they went off in the same direction. So we just got on with our work, forgot all about it. It was no big deal. It's just a weird little thing that happens, Well, it's not even weird. It's just a normal thing. So then I got home at night, and I'm eating my dinner, and I'm watching the BBC News, and they're showing this committee meeting which had been taking place. I haven't got it in front of me now, but there's a fancy name for it. It wasn't the Hutton inquiry, because that came later. That was after he died. It was the one that came first. It was some government inquiry.
Was it a parliamentary select committee?
I'm watching this and I'm eating. Yeah, that's right. It was. So I'm eating my dinner and I'm sort of half watching the TV, and I see the guy that walked past us earlier that day. And he's sitting at a desk. I don't know if you've seen footage of it. And it reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever seen it. Do you remember the thing where the Nazis used to put somebody who'd spoken out against the system, and they were really horrible to them? I mean, really horrible, talking to them, talking down to them and calling them vile names and so on. It reminded me of that. Not as bad as that, but it was pretty bad. They were giving him a hard time. And he was answering questions about the, was it a 45-minute warning that they were trying to sell to the public, the government, for obvious reasons. And I recognized this guy, and I thought, that's the same guy. So as I'm watching this, my phone rings. I pick it up, and it's the guy I was working with. He goes, "Mark, have you seen it?" I can't remember exactly what he said, but "Mark, are you watching the news?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've recognized him. It's the same guy." And he goes, "Yeah, it's him." So that's how we realised it was that same fella. And then strange things because I had that sort of sort of tiny little brush with this person. So what happened was, within a few days of that, the media thought he was in Dorset, which is like a couple of hours away, probably, something like that, on the other coast, on the south coast. We didn't know this at the time. We found this out later, but that's what the media were told. That's where he's going. But he was in Cornwall, on the other coast, the north coast, at this remote farm, because we saw him, And a lot of this came out later, and I did a lot of digging on it later. One of the first things I sort of found, which was really strange, was the guy I worked for. There's a husband and wife, couple of teenagers. They only rarely went to this property, quite a big farm, beautiful farm. And at the end of the month, when I did my work, I used to put my bill into them. I used to send them a bill. They gave me an address to send the bill to, and I'd never been to that place. But I knew this address really well, because every month I'd write my bill out and send him off for 500 quid or whatever. So he then, on this address, it was a village in Oxfordshire. I'm not sure I should even say it, but it was a village in Oxfordshire with 5 letters, right? And that was odd, because this guy, this Dr. Kelly, was from the same village. Yeah, that's the one, right? He was from the same village. Now, okay, there might be nothing in that, but it started making me think about this a bit more, because they were quite mysterious. They obviously had money, because they had this beautiful farm in Cornwall. But they also had property in one of the most expensive counties.
Sorry, Mark, didn't you speculate a military connection with the man of the couple who you were working for?
Yeah. I mean, that was just guesswork.
Intuition.
But when I was on the few occasions that he was actually, yeah, on the few occasions that I was working there, when he was there, he would come down and visit. Very, very nice people. I mean, I got on well with them, but hardly ever saw them. They were very what we would call posh. Phil, there's a difference between sort of working class Southerners and posh Southerners, right? They were very posh, but very nice, very nice. Obviously, they'd had like a public school background and so on. And I remember him coming out of his farmhouse kitchen one day and just yelling at me to, not in a nasty sense, but to come and have a cup of coffee with him. And I wasn't facing him at the time. And there was this, like, I think he forgot my first name, actually. It's like, Wyatt, but it came out in this very deep, posh, like, officer, He had army officer written all over him. Plus he was like 6'3" and strong looking guy, And I just thought, I just had this instinct, well, I bet he's ex-army or something, And then, of course, I put those two remote things together, really, like the same village, possibly army. Is there a connection between him and Kelly, And there may well have not have been, But he wanted somewhere to hide out. He was escaping the media. And he just happened to be in that farm immediately next door to this guy who lived in the same village, although he was staying in a property owned by the guy next door whose name was a different surname. I don't really know I should mention the names at all, but so that was a bit odd. But if you think about it, if he was, I think he may have been doing him a favor, if anything. But to not have it tracked back to him, he put him in the neighbour's place.
Right. He might have.
So that's my
We assume that
guess.
they maybe lived in the same village in Oxfordshire. Maybe they had a connection. And so when the shit started going down, the clients of yours offered him sort of safe harbour, and they threw the press, a sausage the other way sort of thing to throw them off the scent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I find when I started digging into it like years ago, just sort of shortly after this all happened, only because I'd had that brush with him, and I was just curious about it. When I found out he'd been found dead, having committed suicide. Yeah, right.
What were the circumstances of his?
Won't go
his
into
death?
all that, but he was found. Well, from what I can remember, I'd have to check this, but from what I can remember, he'd supposedly cut his wrist, but he was a doctor. Well, I mean, he might not have been. Yeah, he wasn't a medical doctor, was he? He was a sort of science doctor, whatever, you know. But a lot of people were saying at the time, you know, he would know a lot more pleasant ways of finishing himself off than a blunt penknife on a wrist that it wasn't his strong wrist. So there was all this sort of stuff going on. But he was found on this hill called Harrowdown Hill in Oxfordshire, which is very near that village. Right. And this hill has a circle of trees on the top. And it was well known for rituals taking place with guys in white and women in white robes.
Wow.
Now, this was stuff I was digging into at the time, and I was finding all that stuff out at the time. And there were certain theories that maybe he was just poking around and he saw them, and that was what, you know, so it might not have been connected to the other business, possibly. But a lot of high-powered people are in these groups, you know. So I feel a bit awkward talking about it because I don't want to sort of say too much, and I know Bob would know about this sort of stuff because this stuff happens in Cornwall a lot.
Right.
But so getting back to where I was, so they find the body and they say, oh, it's a suicide. Oh, he was depressed, which he was depressed, but the way the media sort of framed it was he was depressed because he'd given this information to the media and it came back to haunt him, sort of thing. Although he was promised that they wouldn't say anything.
He leaked.
They
didn't
threw
he,
him under the bus.
Was it a Guardian
basically,
journalist?
all these. Yeah. I think it was Guardian originally. It was Andrew something. Oh,
Sullivan.
Andrew Gilligan.
Is it not Sullivan? No, Gilligan. Might be Gilligan. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was Gilligan.
It could be.
Yeah, Gilligan. Yeah, and then another journalist went round to his house before he did the flit to Cornwall, and basically said, "Look, if you give me a story, I'll keep the others off your back or whatever." And he's like, "On your bike." So that was it. He was really annoyed with that. Then he came down to Cornwall. Now, yeah. So where this goes with me is at this time, I'm talking. When was this? 2003. I think it was 2003. I'd have to check. Was it 3 or 5?
Yeah, I think it was 3. I think
whenever they invaded Iraq, basically. Yeah, because I mean, this is the thing about this whole story is, it's the hinge for from what I can gather, and I can only read between the lines, he knew that they were sexing up this dossier, as they called it. That was what's the name, Blair and Campbell.
Yep.
Were trying to sell this idea that this guy is dangerous, he can attack us in 45 minutes, and they were trying to make it worse than what it actually was, so that they had an excuse. But of course, that's not just the English establishment in all these arms companies, but the Americans and so on. So there's a lot riding on this in terms of money. Yeah. He was trying to blow the whistle on it, I think. That's my thinking. He was trying to blow the whistle. And they didn't like that, obviously. And that's why it all happened, I think. So where it goes for me, I started just a natural interest in this because I'd met him. Well, I can't even say I met him. I said hello as he walked past, and I recognized him later. And I had a witness that was with me who also saw him. But I started digging into it online. So I'm talking 21 years ago now. And I started noticing that every time I picked up a phone to talk to anyone, because I used to use a landline a lot more in those days, there would be this delayed click when I picked the phone up. Now, I was talking to people online about this stuff, and I was going into greater detail than I have here. And there was somebody online this was on YouTube back in the day, who was very interested in what I had to say. And I was naive. I readily admit it. I was naive, not realizing at that time how important all this stuff was to certain people. And I think, well, I'm pretty sure I was being listened to, because this person, me, had cropped up talking about this stuff. Certain ears in the intelligence community wanted to know, oh, what does he know? Does he know anything we don't know, or whatever? That's my feeling. I don't know that, but I feel, because every time I picked the phone up, there would be this delayed, and then I could sometimes hear heavy breathing and this sort of thing. And that went on for some time. And that could be, again, that could be heavy breathing. That could be anything, couldn't it? That could be just a coincidence. But here's the weird thing. This is where we get back into weird territory. So around that time, and this ties back into I was gardening at the time. I had a call from an old friend who was moving to Brittany in northwest France. And he was looking after this old manor house in Week St Mary, a little village on the Cornish side of the Cornwall-Devon border. And he wanted someone to take over, like using a ride-on tractor mower, massive grounds, massive. And he gave me a ring. He said, oh, Mark, I'm moving to Brittany. Can you come and take this over? And I'd never been to this place, so I went out there. And at that time, I'd never even used a ride-on mower, so it was all new to me. I was just using the old motor mower, push one. So, and it was like a huge job. And I'm like, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? And he said, oh, don't worry about it, Mark. He said, there's a ride-on tractor in one of the old barns. He said, I'll show it to you. So we get in there. I had to, fuel it up, put some oil in it and everything, and eventually got it going. Bit of WD-40 and stuff. So I get it going. And I've taken a drive around the property, big property, like acres. And I'm at the other, this manor house is, I'd have to check, but I think it's 12th century. Wow. It's a really interesting place. So I'm just looking around the grounds at this point, and I'm trying to familiarize myself with the land that I've got to look after when he buggers off to France. And when I'm at the other side of the house, like, it's like half a mile away or something. It's it's not that far, but it's a long way away. I see his wife, who I vaguely knew from years ago, but I didn't know her that well. And she sees me come in, and we recognize each other. And this is, you're like this. She was tree hugging when I saw her. She was literally hugging a tree.
Wow.
Right. And now,
she
years
sacrificed
ago,
any chickens?
I would have laughed. But now, not so much. Not what I know of. So anyway, cut a long story short, I stopped the ride-on tractor alongside her, and it's just me and her husband is the other side of the building and trying to fix his Volkswagen truck, because they're going off to Brittany that same night. So I start chatting to her, and she says, oh, I must have been grinning at the sight of her hugging a tree. And I didn't mean it like that. I was just interested, I wasn't really, and she sort of, at first, she took offense. She's like, it's not as silly as you think, Mark. There's more to this world than you'll know. Because she didn't know anything about me. She didn't know that I was actually into all this stuff, and I was interested, and I'm not going to laugh at her. I was just, I suppose, thinking, oh, this is cool. This is going to be an interesting conversation, because I've just caught you hugging a tree, I mean, it's all uphill, all downhill from there, So she's standing there chatting to me, and we're talking about all this sort of stuff. She's talking about tree spirits and ghosts. And I asked her about the house, this 12th century house. I said, are there any ghosts in there? She said, oh, yeah. She said, how long you got? And she told me about various things that had happened, because they had been house sitting. And for the guy, it was an American billionaire that owned this place. It's not connected to this other farm or those people. It's not connected, but there is a connection. So as I'm talking to her about this stuff, her attention keeps wandering off over my shoulder. And there's no one there. There's just like this massive garden. And I keep looking around thinking, well, what's she looking at? And eventually she said, oh, I'm sorry. She said, I'm not being rude. She said, but there's a gentleman stood behind you. And I'm like, I'm looking over my shoulder. I can't see anyone. Of course, because I don't generally, I have seen things, but I don't see them all the time. And I look back at her, and she said, I better explain myself. She said, I'm a medium.
Oh. And
I remember laughing. I remember saying, oh, I'm a large, like you do. I'm a large.
But don't.
So anyway, so she's like, no, be serious. And she's telling me, she said, I see spirit a lot. And she said, they sometimes communicate with me. They try to get messages over to people that I'm with. So now my attention is like, tuning in a bit. So she said, do you know anyone that wears a cowboy hat? Anyone that's passed that wears a cowboy hat? Well, and at the time, I'd never been to America or anything, So I said to her, so the only people I know with cowboy hats are like when I watch cowboy films on the TV. And she said, and she was trying to be serious and trying to bring me back to that, and I said, well, no. So she asked me, she said, I'm not into fashion, but she said, I can only describe, she described this man. He had a suit on, like a slightly baggy suit. I think it was dark grey. I'd have to check that. And she said, he's sort of probably, I think she said it's about 5'10", 5'11". He was stood away back behind me, and he had this big hat on, quite high, sort of, let's say, peak, like a rounded piece on top, a bit like the cowboys did wear. Right. But it wasn't a cowboy hat, but it had that look about it. Just to somebody who didn't know fashion, and probably me, I would say, yeah, it's a cowboy hat if I saw it, but so she kept describing this cowboy hat. And so she said this guy, this spirit, had been, was concerned about me. Now, this is the weird thing, was concerned about me because he felt someone, now I don't know whether she got whole sentences or whether she got impressions, I don't know. But this guy was evidently concerned about me because he said somehow to her, they're listening to his phone calls. Right? And then I'm like, whoa, what? Do you see the connection there? Yeah. So that was my connection to that whole thing. So that sort of happened afterwards. And I think the penny dropped then. I don't think it dropped later. I think that piece dropped then. And I thought, oh, okay, that rings a bell. But at the time, I'm not sure I got that at the time. But the hat thing still didn't mean anything to me. It meant nothing to me. I didn't know who this guy was, assuming he was real. I didn't know who he was. So my mother at the time, she was just beginning to get a bit of dementia. And when I was visiting her, she was like 300 miles away. When I was visiting her, I remember actually being told, if your parents have that condition or whatever, get out the old photo albums, go through them with them, because it will bring them out and bring out the old memories, and they'll know that stuff, and they can tell you things because that part of their brain's still there, So I knew that she had loads of these photograph albums going back to like the early 60s and beyond, in like the old-fashioned albums. So we're going through all these albums. And at some point, we come across this picture of this little girl, which wasn't my mum. I thought it was my mum. But this little girl with this older guy who was probably sort of 50-something at the time it was taken. He had sort of very short hair. He was wearing a baggy dark grey suit, right? Like a sort of gangster suit of the 50s or something. But I think it was just fashionable then. And he was holding a hat. He was holding a hat with like a big, right? And I didn't know who it was because he died. He actually died like 3 months before I was born. And there were never any. I think there was one photo of him which I'd seen, which was like just him without a hat, just in a shirt, with my mum and her sisters. So that's the only picture I'd ever seen of him. And I knew a little bit about him. All I knew was he was a referee in his spare time, football referee, and he was a musician. He used to sing in public and in churches. That's all I knew about him. And I asked my mum, I said, who is that? And she said, that's my dad. Wow. And she got a bit emotional when she said, she was sort of putting her finger on it. She said, that's my dad. And then I said, oh, is that little girl you? She said, no, it's my cousin, Kathleen. And then she was telling me a bit more. And I said, what do you call that hat? And she said, it's a Homburg, which is not a cowboy hat, but it looks a bit like some of the old cowboy hats, Homburg. So then I thought, maybe, just maybe, that she was talking to someone. And that it would make sense that it was him, because my mum nearly lost me in her pregnancy because her father died. Oh. So if you think about that, wow, if you believe in this stuff, which I sort of do, then he would probably feel not guilty, but a bit obliged. Oh, I better look after this kid because she nearly lost me. I think I came out the wrong way and everything, you know. Yeah, that explains it all.
Wow.
Yes. Mad as a March hare.
That's
so,
cool,
yeah.
man.
So that's a bit of a weird story, isn't it? How it all links together.
Definitely.
That's the other. I didn't send you that bit because that was the chapter that followed the one I sent you.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't want to sort of bog you down with too many.
Yeah, I can totally relate to all these stories that you're telling from your customers, because I'm in the same boat. You know, I work for the general public and different people all the time. Yeah. All different walks of life. I remember one. I think it was 2021. Maybe 2020 actually. Maybe that summer. And I got called to a job. It was a new customer, and it was out in the sticks somewhere, near where your sister moved, that way, so north of here. I remember pulling up at this house, and it's quite isolated. And I remember noticing cameras all over the house, all down the approach to the drive, just outdoor cameras. You don't see them very often, but. Anyway, I gets in and I'm doing this bit of a job, and I can't. I'm not like nosy or anything, but some things you just cannot ignore. And there's just military paraphernalia everywhere, and there's like special forces stuff on the walls, and military games, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, wow, this guy's SAS of some sort. Won't say where. But I mean, it just made me think about all the cameras and like, crikey, he's taking this seriously. This guy's security and stuff, and
maybe he knows that someone's coming.
Yeah. But it's great variety, getting to meet people from all sorts of walks of life, isn't it, Mark?
Oh yeah. I met some wonderful people. I mean, like most of them have gone because most of them were quite elderly at the time. Yeah, some really, really good people, and they weren't all crazy. I mean, some of them were just interesting in other ways, you know. So, you're probably running out of time. So, are you running out of time?
I don't think we're far off, are we?
No.
We've not been going an hour yet. I don't think, have we? Nearly an hour. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
If you want to hear one tiny extra thing, but sort of it's on the same thing, because this happened later, and I often wonder whether there was something more to it. So, do you remember? I think it was 2012. I'm not sure, but I think it's 2012. They had an election with David Cameron. The guy, the Liberal Party was still doing quite well, weren't they? The Lib Dems or something. I can picture him.
Nick.
Oh dear,
Nick
I can't.
Clegg.
Do you remember the three? Nick Clegg.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And who was the other one? That says
he works for Facebook now.
George.
Blair, not Blair.
Gordon
does
Brown.
He?
Yeah. He got a job at Facebook quite a high-powered job. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was Gordon Brown, wasn't it? Who was defeated.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
By a coalition.
So,
there was a coalition.
I can't remember. There were three of them, the three main ones. Yeah. So I basically went to go and see. I was going to meet my daughter who lived in Bristol, and she's still around there now. And the idea was we were going to see a band in the evening called the Fleece Brothers, who I'm still into. I still love them. They were playing on a ship in Bristol in dry dock. And I'm going to say, I'll say what this is, but it's THEKLA. So say that for yourself. But when I say it, it always comes out with an F, but it's TH.
Right.
So it's like Thekla. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so they used to have, I think they still do, they have bands on this ship in dry dock. Okay.
Right.
So that was why I was in Bristol. But on that day, Bristol was under intense security. They had helicopters everywhere. They had armed police, army everywhere, literally everywhere. But I was there for the gig in the evening. Right? I didn't know this stuff as well. I sort of vaguely knew it was on. So they had a big top, like a circus big top, down by the docks. I don't think they call it the docks, but it's in Bristol anyway. And it was on Sky TV. It was live. They were interviewing all these top politicians, and that's why all the security was there, obviously. And all of them were in Bristol on that one day. And we went to go and get a drink at lunchtime, and I was with my daughter and her boyfriend of the time. Can't think of his name, but Harry, his name was. So we go into this pub. Now, this is me being an idiot, really. Again, not being an idiot. So I go and I say something that I know, as soon as I've said it, I know I shouldn't have said it. But you know, sometimes when there's when you got to say it because it's like it seemed like a funny idea at the time, right? But later you regret it and you think, oh, I shouldn't have said that because like not everyone's got the same sense of humor for a start, you know. Because my sense of humor is quite dark, and we go into this pub and it's fairly quiet. There's a woman behind the bar serving, just one woman, sort of middle-aged woman. There's a few people around the bar, and there's a young lad, probably 20-something. And this young lad is really, he's not the sharpest tool in the box, right? He's like, he's really pleased that he's like excited because he's seen all of these top politicians and he thinks it's great. Oh, I've seen, and he's listing them off. And he was saying, I saw Nick Clegg this morning and I saw David Cameron and whatever. And I'm just, we're sort of looking at each other sort of like, really? And you're excited about that, you know, sort of not to him, but just to ourselves. And then, so what came to my mind was, I feel terrible even saying this now, but I made the really bad joke, really tasteless joke. I'll hold my hands up and said, because obviously they're all in the same place, aren't they? On the same day, in the same place, right? So what does that make you think of? You know, it's like a
assassination.
It's a risk to their yes. And of course, if somebody was going to do that, it would be like the perfect opportunity. Hence all the security. You know, it's like it's obvious. That's why we got so much security everywhere. But I couldn't resist it, and I just made this comment. I don't even know if I should say it.
Go on.
But where are the IRA when you need them? Right? When you most need them. Oh, you know, because I didn't like any of them. I mean, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. It's not like I wanted to do that. It's just like a sick joke, a throwaway line. I'd heard someone else say it years ago, and it always stuck in my mind. I thought, yeah, that's a cool one. And it obviously isn't a real thing. It's just like a joke. It's a sick joke. So I said that and thought nothing of it. And my daughter sort of like was a bit embarrassed and sort of like, Dad. And Harry was away with the fairies. He didn't really know what I was talking about anyway. But anyway, I thought no more of it. We got a beer. They never said anything. No one said anything to us. I went outside. They had it was like an old Victorian house with a tiny, tiny front yard, which had been turned into a tiny beer garden, which consisted of about 2 tables, one either side of a doorway. So I sat down. I think there was one of these benches. So I sat down with her boyfriend on my side. Tasha was the other side, facing the house, facing the pub. So I'm really close to this pavement that ran alongside, and it was heading down to the big top where all the politicians were, and it was busy. There were suits walking back and forward, armed coppers, everything, helicopters all the time. And we're just having a beer, watching the world go round. And this bloke comes up to me. Well, he comes up to the little wall, like a dwarf wall. And he was probably 55, 60. One of these, he looked like a policeman, like a detective or some sort of security. And he stands in front of this little wall, staring directly at me. I've got the brick wall behind me of the house. And I thought, oh, he's reading a menu. So I'm looking around, and there was only a sign on saying what the pub was. There wasn't a menu. And I'm thinking, oh, that's strange. So I looked back, and he's still glaring. He's glaring at me. And he just stands there for ages, staring at me. And I'm sort of looking back at him, and I'm not sure what to say. I don't want to encourage him, you know. And Harry sat next door to me. He just went, why is that bloke staring at you, Mark? Why is that bloke staring? And I said, I don't know, mate. I don't know. And this bloke must have heard this, and he's still standing there staring at me. But it's like an evil glare. By this time, my she's heard the conversation. She's looking around. She sees the bloke staring. She's like arm's length away from him. She looks back. She says, Dad, why is that bloke staring at you? And I said, I still don't know. And he's just staring. It made me really uncomfortable. I didn't know what he was, you know. And then after a while, he just shook his head. He just went, oh, like that, and walked away. And they're all like, well, what was going on? I said, I had no idea. And then we thought about it. I'd made that sick joke in the pub. Maybe maybe the landlady, they would have gone in there in the morning and said, oh, if you see anything unusual, hear anything, report it. So I think my guess was that this guy had a little camera on his lapel or something. And he was taking pictures of me, probably clicking it in his pocket, you know, click, 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 sending it back to wherever, the little mobile vans. And they were looking for me on, this is my guess, they were looking for me on wanted posters and stuff. And of course, they couldn't find me because I'm innocent, you know, I'm innocent of anything, honest, Gov. So that's what my guess was. Either that or he was just a random loony, you know. But then I was watching TV the other day, and they've got these specs now, which have got cameras in them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they can look at somebody. Yeah. So I saw that the other day, and I thought, yeah, maybe he had something like that going on, and he was just checking me out.
You got to remember,
and maybe they just say, well, I've got nothing on him.
Whatever tech that we know about now is 20 years out of date. They had it 20 years ago. So who knows what they have now?
Yeah.
But yeah,
so,
I think
I didn't know if I should tell that one on.
I think you got rumbled.
But it was a long time ago, isn't it?
I think you got rumbled by a stool pigeon in the pub.
Yeah, I think somebody in that pub.
Yeah.
And then they checked me out, realised there was nothing to fear, you know.
That's what they used to call them in the gulags.
And that's probably what the little head shape was.
They used to call them stool pigeons. They'd put
was
one
it stool pigeon?
Yeah, they put one in every cell, in every block.
Oh, in the camps?
Yeah, as an informant.
Really?
Yeah. Solzhenitsyn talks about him.
Did you read Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah.
Yeah, Gulag Archipelago, he talks about it. Yeah, and how he used to spot them. And he could sort of tell from the behaviour which ones were sort of informants. And anytime you got arrested or put in a cell, anything like that, there would always be one there listening in to what everyone was saying. Yeah. To report back. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of good things about that book, yeah.
Oh, it's a must read. It's quite intimidating. Yeah. I read the abridged version because I think the full version's really, really long. I think the abridged one's the best part of 500 pages, I think. But yeah, it's definitely worth a look. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've heard that, you should give it to anyone who sort of thinks that communism's a good idea. Just read that book.
Yeah, totalitarianism in general.
I think so. I think
government's getting out of hand.
Yeah, just general. Yeah, either side. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for it's about how your fellow citizens react as well. I picked a good time to read it during the nonsense of the last 4 years.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, people grassing up their neighbours for having too many people in the house.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I know it's scary, isn't it? It's scary that they would be so willing. Yeah.
Yeah, we're weird creatures, aren't we, Mark? Let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, there's that whole era has left a nasty taste in my mouth. Because you saw things like we just said, you saw things, you thought, wow, how could you do that? Just so readily dob your neighbours in over something like that,
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And all those little arrows in shops.
Oh my gosh.
I got told off for following the arrows the wrong way. And I just give them a finger.
Oh, you naughty boy. You naughty boy. You didn't follow the arrows.
Oh, yeah. Well, no. Oh, yeah.
Fucking hell.
I mean, yeah. It's. I think you have to laugh at it now because, it's the only way to get around it, really. Because, scary stuff.
Yeah. Well, Mark, before we get bogged down,
all those little job swerves.
Yeah. Before we relitigate all that nonsense, which we could spend a whole podcast doing that probably.
That's right. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, we've gone over an hour now. We should let you go. But thanks for joining us again. It's been good fun. I've enjoyed hearing your stories.
Yeah, go on. Clear off, he said. Yeah, the time flew by.
It does. Yeah.
I'm sorry you didn't get a word in edgeways.
No, that's the way it should be.
It's the best way.
Poor Matt, you never got to speak.
No, it's fine. Yeah,
you don't have to do any work when the gas rabbits away.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
No, I want to hear you sometimes. I want to hear this psychology stuff you do.
I wouldn't be
when you set your channel up, Matt.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit strong to call it psychology stuff.
Uh-huh.
I can be your first case study. What's wrong with this lunatic?
This is just not enough time to unfold the many layers. Yeah.
Well, on that note,
that'll be a six-parter.
It was, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks again, Mark. Links are in the show notes, and check out Mark's books and Cuckoo Town. You're going to come back with Cuckoo Town podcast sometime soon?
Yeah, I hope so. I did try to put one out recently, and my laptop decided there wasn't enough memory on it, which is rubbish, really, because there was nothing on it.
Right.
I've had issues with my laptop, so somehow I lost it all on Audacity. Right. After I finished it, I did a whole episode on the Reverend Robert Stephen Hawker, and I was really proud of it, and then lost it.
Oh, bollocks.
So I think someone's trying to tell me something. Finish it. Finish it. I've done with it.
Well, you'll have to let us know. So we can,
I've got other
people.
ideas, other irons in the fire. So yeah.
Right. Well, this has been fab.
Yeah,
Mark.
I'm hoping to do something, but yeah. Okay, I'll leave it to it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
No problem. Pleasure as always. I'll drop you an email tomorrow with all the links and everything on. All right, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
All right,
See you later.
Cheers. Bye.
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 We'll be back for part 2 in 5 minutes
I'll
or
try and get
so.
off here now. Bye.
There he goes.
Oh, he's gone.
Yay!
He's
Well,
gone.
it's
He's gone.
We'll be back in 5 minutes for part 2. We'll open the phone lines for a bit. Right. Sayonara.